Communicate Your Research competition is really exciting. So I'm thrilled that you're all here and going to spend the next 30 minutes with us celebrating these exciting, passionate young people. This competition started in 2017, and it was really my husband, Dr. Matthew George's idea, with the goal to get these young people in the room and to interact with our industry. So it really has two purposes. One, it's about the students. So giving them exposure to our industry and giving them a platform to share the research that they live and breathe, and it's such a big part of their lives. And then secondly, it's a little bit selfish, right? We're looking for young, energetic, smart people, and these are them. So it's really a treat for us to get them to be here and to see our industry as a potential career opportunity. And finally, it's about bringing together our industry and universities to make strong connections and collaborations to do good research to drive innovation. So I'm so lucky to have a great panel with me to judge this. So on stage, I have Dr. Tony Batterham, who was with this competition from the beginning. APM Animal Health is a major sponsor of this competition and believes in research just like we do at Bovine Dynamics. So Dr. Tony Batterham. And I also have Dr. Annalene Patiacci, who's an expert in nutrition, but also an expert in communicating research and science. So she's perfectly situated to be able to judge this competition. Welcome. And we also have 6 judges in the audience with you all today in the front row. And so I'd like to recognize those 6 judges. And you're here, you're part of this judging process as well. So our 6 judges in the audience, starting with Meat and Livestock Australia, who has actually sponsored these students to be able to attend with us today. So I have Dr. Joseph McMenamin. From Fibro Animal Health, Danilo Grandini. From Brazil, our international judge. Grant Melrose from John D. Professor Graham Gardner from Murdoch Union. And I have 2 judges from Bovine Dynamics, nutritionists, Dr. Matthew George and Dr. Brent Berry. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first student. So our first student, he's just as passionate about all of you about eating quality in Australia. We're global leaders in eating quality, and he's actually studying how genomics can be used to impact eating quality. Welcome, Andrew Lin from the University of New England.
Thanks, Mel. Good job. No one, and I mean no one, feeds cattle better than the people in this room. We strive to create quality product every single day. We want to ensure that the consistency of that product is delivered every single time, all while fitting within market specifications needed for the markets. And that's for the domestic market as well as the global market. We do it better than everyone else. But most importantly, these are the people that we do it for, the consumers. We need to ensure they are happy with the product, because a happy consumer will come back time and time again and repurchase that product. Not only will they repurchase that product, they're willing to pay more for that premium product that we deliver every single time. Now, we've all seen a pen of cattle like this, varied, and there's probably a couple of Brahman in the background as well. And that's the problem with Australia. We have such a varied climate, which means that we've got such a varied population of cattle. So how do we pick the animals that are going to eat best? Let's have a look at this animal. Can we select by the genes that have for tenderness? Perhaps we can look at the genes that select for juiciness or even flavour. Or what if we can find a gene or a region of the genome that can select for multiple traits, like overall liking or even the overarching MQ4? The aim of this study was to identify those regions that are linked to the 5 eating quality traits. We took approximately 1,700 strip loins, we DNA tested them, and then we got consumers, untrained consumers, because that reflects what our consumers are, to sit down and eat those products and tell us what they thought about them. And then we did genome-wide association studies for each of those traits. So we'll have a look at the population that we used. We wanted to identify the commercial product that we deliver in Australia, which is so varied, as I said before. We had some Angus. We had some Jerseys, which are, in the dairy. We also went for the Brahmans, which are, feed the northern systems. And then we did everything in between, because that's what Australian commercial cattle are. But more importantly, it's got to be heritable. We can't select on a trait if it's not heritable. And so what we saw was tenderness, which is seen as the most important trait of all, it's quite heritable. 0.33 is fantastic as far as biological heritabilities go, which is very exciting for us, which means that we can select for these traits. Juiciness has the lowest bearing on overall of the MQ4 score, and although it's important, it's okay that it's a lower heritability, and it's even at 0.18, it's not too bad. So we'll go to the genome-wide association study. I want to have a focus on the CMIP, the top gene of chromosome 18. This gene was significant for all traits except for juiciness, which means that this gene may be linked to what we want to identify. Not only did this gene identify for tenderness, flavour, overall liking, but what we needed to figure out was how is this being represented in literature prior? And it's been linked to frame score and hip height. And does that bring up to questions, does frame score have a relation to tenderness? That's something that we're going to have a look at later. Now, if we zoom back out, we don't only have the novel gene of CMIP, we've also got the genes that we already know for mechanical measurements. Cas gene, which is calcistatin, and then we've got the calpain gene on chromosome 29. This confirms that we're on the right track for identifying these regions. But we can't just use these 5 regions to select for eating quality. We really need to emphasise that all those SNPs have an effect on eating quality, and that's when we come to the prediction stage, we're going to use all those SNPs effects. So the conclusion for this study is that we can identify the regions that have good quality. Tenderness is the easiest to select for, and we can probably just select heavily on that, and the others will follow with it. And in the future, we can look at using EBVs, which is important for you guys out there selecting the animals that you want in the future to put over your commercial cows to produce a better quality animal. But more importantly, we can make sure that the satisfaction of our consumers is maintained throughout the rest of our commercial productivity. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. We might start with some questions.
Thanks, Andrew. Great job. Wonderful study. Just a question for you. Genomics not being my wheelhouse. Took the heritability results you got there. Would another study be required that includes pedigree and progeny information to improve those numbers, or do we need to?
Oh, sorry, could you repeat the last part of that question?
Do we need to do another study that includes progeny and pedigree information? As I understand it, this particular study just involved the commercial cattle. We didn't have associated progeny information?
Yeah, absolutely. In the development of a EBV, we would need to look at the pedigree information. In this study, however, it is just purely based on the observation of that individual animal's genetic potential for eating quality, rather than passing on to EBVs. So in the future, EBVs would be the next step.
Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, so these were Australian consumers, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. So then could you extrapolate this further and say genetically produce cows that the Japanese really like or the Chinese really like in terms of eating quality?
That's a fantastic question, Annalene. So yes, we could absolutely aim those studies towards those, to those other consumers. And MSA has done so much work looking at how other populations around the world perceive their preference in beef. I know that Americans, for instance, really put an emphasis on flavour over tenderness. And so I think, if we do put that emphasis on particular genes that affect flavour, then, potentially we provide a product more suited to the Americans. And essentially it's just working out what each consumer wants from their beef, and we can aim to do that.
That's amazing.
I have one more question. So, I'm pretty passionate about adoption. Can you think of any recommendations or ideas of how our feedlots can adopt genomics and EBVs into their programs?
Yeah, absolutely. We could aim at the adoption through proving that, well, A, we've got to make sure that it works. But secondly, we need to make sure that there's a good communication between, sorry, I'm stumbling here. However, we have done a good job of making sure that our producers know how EBVs work. And essentially, all we are aiming to do is add another EBV for them to select on, which will suit their market, essentially. If they want to just produce beef, then they can just produce beef. But if they want to go that extra step and produce high-quality beef based on what the consumer wants, then we just add that into the EBV system.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
In Australia, we face challenging weather conditions. We've been faced with several wet winters with extreme rainfall, really wet pens that can induce cold stress. Our next speaker from the University of New England, Pippa Pryor, is going to share with us an ideal solution for potentially dealing with the issue of cold stress. Welcome, Pippa.
Am I on? Thank you so much, Mel. So you guys definitely heard that right. This study was conducted in winter, looking at the effects of cold stress and how we can mitigate it. Now, most shelter research and thermal research in Australian feedlots is focused on heat stress because of our incredibly hot climate. But climate change is bringing an expanding amplitude of temperatures, which is going to result in more cold stress in our feedlots. So we wanted to test this, and our hypothesis was that warmer and drier cattle would have improved production and even potentially welfare outcomes. So this study was conducted at UNE's research feedlot, and we had 480 Boss Taurus steers inducted into the feedlot. And we had 12 pens, 6 sheltered and 6 unsheltered. And those sheltered pens had a waterproof polyethylene material. Over the course of the trial, we collected data. We looked at daily feed intake, collected periodic live weight data, and we also then collected carcass data as well as collecting the adrenal glands. There were 2 complications in this trial. The first one was that the shelter structure sustained wind damage on day 12, which resulted in a temporary reallocation of our sheltered cattle into 6 shade cloth pens. And the second problem was a COVID lockdown, which meant that we couldn't get on site to collect any behavioural data. But nonetheless, we could collect a bunch of other information, like weather data. And so from this information, I then calculated 2 indices. With all of our data collected, I then ran a linear mixed effects model and calculated the estimated marginal means to see if there were differences between our sheltered and unsheltered cattle. And we found that there were. The final live weight of our sheltered cattle showed a trend to be higher than our unsheltered cattle. And quite similarly, the hot standard carcass weight of our sheltered cattle also showed this trend of being higher. And this is due to a higher accretion of muscle and fat, which we can see in the rib fat, which was significantly higher in our sheltered cattle. But why did we see these improvements in our carcass traits? So we theorized that our unsheltered, our colder animals are diverting more energy to thermoregulation. And because they are physically using more energy to keep warm, there is less available to actually grow. And this is a trend that we can see across our final production and carcass variables. So the average daily gain, both from day 0 to day 38 and day 40 to exit, was significantly higher in our sheltered cattle. Well, they were actually gaining between 100 and 200 grams more per day. And this is reflected in our gain to feed ratio, which was also significantly higher for our sheltered cattle. But there are generally two explanations for why we see these extended gains. The first one, as we have been talking about, is that cold animals divert energy to thermoregulation. But there is this other possibility. So when cattle are cold, like our unsheltered animals, they have been found to increase the rate of passage through the digestive tract, which actually reduces the feed's digestibility. And so our unsheltered animals probably had reduced energy availability as well as reduced feed digestibility. The final thing that we examined was welfare. And it is a little difficult to comment without specific behavioral data, but excitingly, we found that the unsheltered animals had enlarged adrenal glands, and this was caused by a higher production of cortisol due to stress. And this indicates that waterproof shelter could actually be really important for the welfare of our feedlot cattle. So this trial found that waterproof shelter improved production and carcass traits, and even potentially welfare. Now, more research does need to be done to really substantiate the exact trait improvements and to collect some behavioral data. This trial's findings indicate a need for waterproof shelter in our feedlots in a temperate winter. Thank you so much to Bovine Dynamics and APN for running this trial. Thank you so much.
What do you think about that?
Great job. Pippa, thank you very much, and great design to that study.
Thank you.
A lot of the time with these trials, you might find a statistical significance, but the question is whether there's a biological significance here as well, and I think you've definitely demonstrated that. Just to the adrenal glands, on the poster out there, it shows that there's 42 events through the 100-day feeding period. So, not all the time, but there was rain around. There were instances where it dried out. Do you think that the increased adrenal gland is related to chronic stress? Like, it may not be a linear relationship from the time the adrenal gland actually starts to get big. There's a threshold of stress that actually has to be experienced. Do you think that another way to investigate that might be in the future serial slaughters, or maybe using other methods like behavioural attributes?
100%. Because we didn't have any behavioural data, the adrenal gland was kind of a supplementary idea. And it's something that's been emerging. We found in recent studies that there has been this large adrenal gland in stressed animals. But you're right in saying that it is generally more of a response to acute stress. And there could have been some acute stress in, chronic stress, sorry. So there could have been some chronic stress in our unsheltered cattle, potentially. If they were having trouble lying down, if their pens were just incredibly muddy, they might have been standing more, had a bit more stress. So that could have related there. But definitely, the next time we run this trial, or a variation of this trial, I'd love to do some blood serums and really get a real idea of what the difference is between acute and chronic cold stress events and their physiological and biological effects, definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pippa, what's the temperature?
Sorry,
in
say
winter?
again.
What was the temp? And for how long did this go for?
Yeah, so we calculated that the comprehensive climate index was mild for 31 days, but the temperature really ranged from kind of -5 up to kind of 15 or 16 degrees. I think the average temperature over the trial was 15 degrees. Yeah.
All right, so thinking from the, like, obviously this is fantastic for the cows, better quality, better animal welfare. How do you think this would be useful for consumers to understand this aspect?
I think it can be quite difficult to explain to our consumers that we're improving welfare because we don't want to say that welfare has been reduced previously. But I think that we can explain to them that we're doing research, we're developing, we're still learning, we're still people, and that providing them with a waterproof shelter, like giving someone a raincoat or an umbrella when it rains, keeps them warmer. You know, everyone's had a night where they've had to walk home in the cold and the rain, the car's broken down, they can't get home. And it's awful and it's miserable and you shake for hours afterwards. And I think that we can relate people to animals and just give them real life examples. You know, you don't like being cold and wet, why would cows? Hopefully.
Very nice. I have a question about, basically 60% of the feedlot cattle are located on the Darling Downs here in Queensland. So how portable is the information that you've shared with us today to cattle located on the Downs?
That's a great question. So this was part of a summer and winter trial. I was only the honours student on the winter section. But in the summer trial, they tested unsheltered, shade cloth, and waterproof. And what they found in that trial was that waterproof shelter did improve in summer. Now, to be fair, this was also run in winter in Armidale. It's a bit colder, and it was quite a cold summer. But this would need to be tested in the Darling Downs. This is not a solution for every feedlot because every feedlot is different. Every feedlot has different climatic conditions, different goals. But this is an exciting piece of information that we can potentially take and see if it's going to apply to all of our feedlots in the Darling Downs. And I think that the next step is to extrapolate this research out across different climates and see where it fits in. But there is also this trend that we're seeing that climate change is going to bring unexpected storms in summer. And that is when our cattle are not acclimatized at all to the cold conditions. They've got their summer coats on, they don't have any extra fat. And so in those moments when they get those big storms, when the Brahman are already sometimes cold in summer, this waterproof shelter may actually protect them when they experience unexpected cold stress. But again, this would all have to be tested. It's all kind of hypothetical at the moment.
Thank you, Pippa.
Wonderful, thanks so much.
Bunk management is a key process for performance in feedlots. And our next speaker, Sam Platts from the University of Queensland, is going to share his evaluation of an automated process for bunk management. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you, Mel. Good afternoon, everyone. Automation is going to be a huge part of the feedlot industry going forward. And I'd like to start this presentation today by giving you two questions to think about. So firstly, why do we want to automate a system or process at one of our feedlots? Automation is designed to relieve human operators of tasks that are either time-consuming, labour-intensive, require high degrees of precision and accuracy, and require that consistent outcomes are made. Now, think about your experiences with bunk management in the past. How does that relate to these points here? We know that bunk management is the process of matching the amount of feed that we deliver to the amount of feed that cattle can handle. But there are three key points that arise when we're from the literature when we're talking about bunk management. The first of those is consistency. The second is precision and accuracy. And finally, we need full consideration of the variables that are going to impact feed intake for that pen of cattle on that day. So with that in mind, what I'd like to talk to you about today are some of the challenges with conventional bunk management, how we've gone about automating this process, and some of our results from our first study, and why we think that automation of bunk management can benefit the industry going forward. So, sorry guys. So there are a number of key challenges involved with bunk management. Firstly, we need accurate determination of feed intake. We also need to maintain a high and consistent feed intake for our cattle while modulating rumen health. We need highly skilled and specialised staff, and no matter the experience level of our staff, mistakes can always be made. And finally, with the increasing scale of feedlots, we have larger quantities of feed being delivered each day, and bunk haulers are making decisions on hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of feed each day. So, in a nutshell, we have a job that's getting harder for our staff with an increased risk that poor decisions are going to be costly. So, to try and overcome some of these issues, we have automated bunk management. And to do this, we've utilised an automatic bunk scanner developed by MLA and Manabotics to determine feed intake under day and night conditions with high degrees of precision and accuracy. This feed intake data was then incorporated into an algorithm that we developed, which also considered a number of key variables that are going to impact the feed intake of that pen of cattle on that day in order to come up with a well-considered allocation. We conducted our first study in 2021 at a feedlot on the Darling Downs. This was comprised of a complete randomised block design with 3 treatments. The first of those was conventional bunk management. The second was semi-automated bunk management, which involved the automatic scanner and manual feed allocation. And finally, we had a fully automated system, which incorporated the scanner and our feeding algorithm. So in this study, we inducted just over 5,500 Bos Indicus cross steers at an average entry weight of 420 kilos. These cattle were randomly assigned to each treatment and put into 265 head pens. They were then reimplanted at day 42 to 45, and they exited the feedlot at equivalent days on feed. And I'd just like to point out that we did blind the bunk callers to the scan volumes bunk side in order to prevent any sort of bias between the treatments. So when we looked at our performance results, we found that there was no significant difference across the whole feeding period for final body weight, average daily gain, feed conversion, or economically relevant carcass values. However, we did find that from induction to reimplant, the control and semi-automated treatments outperformed the fully automated treatment, but from reimplant to exit, the control and fully automated treatments outperformed the semi-automated treatment. And we thought that was really interesting, and while there was no significant difference in our key performance characteristics over the whole period, we thought we'd break that feed intake data down and look at it over 10-day intervals. So you can see here that over the starter phase, the fully automated treatment wasn't able to keep up with the control and semi-automated treatments. However, over the back half of the period, those cattle were able to catch up and actually outperformed the semi-automated treatment and as well as the control. So this has given us some really good information about where our feeding system has done well and where we need to look to improve it going forward. So overall, we saw no key differences in our key performance outcomes between semi and automated bunk management. We also saw no difference in mortality, health, or economically relevant carcass values over the whole feeding period. And we were able to identify a number of key areas where we're going to hopefully be able to improve our system going forward. So to conclude, automation of bunk management can achieve equivalent performance and health outcomes as a highly skilled bunk caller. And finally, what are the benefits for you guys out there? Well, firstly, we want to be able to have higher consistency and accuracy for our feed allocations to be able to hopefully improve production and efficiency going forward. Just as importantly, we want to be able to support staff and help them to do a better job, and also provide a risk mitigation tool for management. And finally, we hope that through more accurate and consistent feeding, that we're going to be able to improve animal welfare, reduce the incidences of things like acidosis, and also reduce our feed waste. So thank you very much for your time, everyone.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Sam. Great job. And I know your randomised block design there, you utilised 3 pens and 7 blocks. When you initially were designing the study, there's 4 elements to a power calculation. There's the significance level, the effect size, and power, which you're ultimately trying to figure out. What did you utilise as the effect size in your calculation, and are you sufficiently powered in this? And if you're not, what would you plan to do as the next phase of this?
Well, the way we did calculate this out so that we would have sufficient power in this, because that's obviously an incredibly important part of any research study. I think we would have, ideally, you want to have as many head in there as you can. I think if we had maybe a few more treatments, we may have been able to modulate out some of the environmental factors that we had. But yeah, to answer your question, Tony, I feel that we did have enough power through it. It was all definitely calculated out.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. That was really interesting. I think, you know, Michael McQueen just said that automation is coming through. So you kind of expect this to be happening in this industry, so that's really cool that you're tackling it. I think the thing that really struck out for me is even though you haven't seen a significant improvement in their health outcomes and weight and all that sort of stuff, it just means that the traditional way actually is a pretty good system. So that's a giant-sized tick for the lot feeding. But the question I have is, maybe changing the angle, is how much more efficient will this process be?
Do you mean for efficiency for our cattle in terms of production?
For the staff who are actually out there.
Oh yeah, so really staffing is a huge issue in the industry at the moment, and also we not only need to get good staff, but we need to be able to look after them and retain them. So I feel that this isn't going to replace anyone, but it's going to change how you do your job. And it's going to provide you with basically a decision support tool that's going to be there, similarly to having a nutritionist with you the whole time, to be able to make a well-informed decision going forward. And hopefully it might be able to speed up the process a little bit, and also take that full amount of pressure off just one person who's bunk calling each day and, you know, arriving very early in the morning to do the first call, and then we're just trying to help people to not burn them out, basically.
Thanks, Sam. I'm sure that the staff challenges that we have in Australia are not specific to this country, that they're a global issue. So is this tool being used internationally, or do you have any knowledge about what other countries are doing?
Yep, so great question, Mel. This technology, the bunk scanner component, has been adopted very recently in the US in a couple of big cattle integrators. It's really only just taking off over there, but I think a number of people are really seeing the potential benefits for this going forward. And I was over there recently actually and spoke to a number of people about this, and they are having similar problems like we are with finding and retaining high quality staff, and also they want a system to make this easier for people and have a greater reliability that the right decisions are going to be made each day for their cattle.